G'day, I'm back in the Scamp and I've got my AI system here. This is what I went over in the last video, how I put this together, but it's got a NVIDIA Nano Jetson in the bottom to run the AIs, and in the top I've got a Raspberry Pi 5 to run everything else. So I'm ready to start coding, but before doing that, I want to make sure my coding environment stays with the AI theme. So I'm going to use an AI assistant in VSCode to assist with coding. So this video is going to be about how I set that up. So the AI assistant I'm going to use is called Continue.dev. It runs as an extension to VSCode. And the nice thing about it is it's very customizable. So I can set it up to use different models that are running on my local AI system, like this one here, or on my graphics card in my main computer. And I can customize it to run within the constraints of the environment. So things like the size of the LLM, content window size, those things become very important, because as soon as you go beyond the GPU memory size, everything slows down. So I'm going to make sure that I customize it to fit inside basically an 8 gig memory window.
Just before I start looking at the Continue.dev AI assistant, just have a look at my environment. It'll help when I'm walking through some of the demos. So my main development PC is a power spec PC. It's running Windows 11. It's got 32 gigabytes in it, running a Ryzen 7. And the most important thing is it's running an RTX 2080 Ti, which has 11 gigabytes of GPU memory in it. And on that, I'm running Ollama and the various LLMs I'm using. On this machine also, this is where I'm running VSCode for development, and where I'm going to install Continue, which is going to talk to both Ollama on the same machine using that RTX 2080. As well, I'm going to be connecting to Ollama that runs on my Jet AI box that I've made for my Scamp camper. So that's a smaller instance of Ollama. It's only got 8 gigabytes of GPU memory, so I can only run smaller LLMs in there. So you'll see when I'm going through the setup, I've set it up so that I can switch between either the agent using the larger Ollama instance or the smaller Jetson Nano Ollama instance. Okay, let's have a look at installing Continue.dev, the AI assistant. So I'm in my VSCode environment at the moment. I'm going to go to my extensions. I'm going to enter Continue. There's Continue.dev, and I'll just do an install. So it's fairly fast install, and I now have Continue on my menu out here. I also drag it around and put it in other windows in my environment. When you first install Continue, you'll get a interface something like this, where up here you can select which assistant you want to use, and by default it'll just have local assistant defined, and then down here area to work with the models in your code. And at the moment I'm in chat mode, and more on that later. So at the moment the default is to use local assistant, and down here you can see how to set up local assistant. So each assistant is defined, or its interface is defined in a YAML file. So if I click this little gear icon next to models, it's going to open up the configure file for this local assistant. At the moment there's nothing defined, there's no LLMs that it's connecting to. But that file exists in a directory under your, at least on Windows, under users, my username .continue /config YAML, and I haven't got anything defined. You can see how to define the YAMLs to define an assistant if you go to the docs for Continue.dev, and under reference there's a config YAML reference. So again, if I'm just doing this for my local assistant, or the assistant called local assistant, I'd go through and put YAML in that looks something like this, and there's a lot more information about how to fill in the various parts of that YAML definition. So things like defining models and configuration rules and prompts and all sorts of things. However, for what I'm doing, I'm not using local assistant. What I'm doing is I've got 2 more assistants defined, and remember I've got 2 instances of Ollama defined that have different capabilities. So I've got one that's running on my power spec PC and a NVIDIA GPU and I've called that assistant Power Spec Assistant, and it uses LLMs and things that will run well on that GPU. And then I also have one called Jet AI Assistant that connects to Ollama that's running on my Jetson Nano, and it has different LLMs and different customizations to work well on the constrained memory of that device. So I've created additional assistants to connect to each of the 2 Ollama instances. To do that, under my users, my username.continue directory, instead of updating this config.yaml, the default one, I've created a new folder called assistants, and in there I've defined 2 YAML definitions for the 2 additional assistants, one for my power spec PC and one for the Jet AI, which runs inside my Scamp. So let's have a look at this power spec YAML, and the easiest way to get to it is in VS Code. Change the assistant that we're using to the power spec assistant, and down here select models gear, and we can see what I defined for this power spec YAML. And in here it starts with the name, so this is where the power spec assistant name came from, and the definition of the name. Version and schema, these fields are all needed, and then I list the models that I'm going to use that are running on the power spec GPU. So I'm using 2 models. So one, I've got a fairly large model. I'm using the Quinn 2.5 Coda 7 billion parameter model, and I've got a 16,000 token context window. And the way I define that was give the model a name, say what the provider is. So the provider is Ollama in my case. Point to the instance of Ollama. You can leave that out for local Ollama instances if you want, but just to be consistent, I'm going to always put in the API base. So I connect to 11.434 on my machine to connect to my local Ollama instance. Define what model I'm using. So this is the model name in Ollama. So if I do an Ollama list on my machine, I'll see a whole bunch of models, and this is one of the models that I've installed. So 7 billion parameter version of the Quinn 2.5 Coda. This is how I set the context length. So when I set up this model, I want to make sure it fits in the GPU memory. So I do things like look at my performance manager, look at the GPU, and see how much memory I'm using when I start up that AI assistant and ask it some questions. So that's a good way to find out whether you're using too much memory or not. And the other thing I'm doing is set up the roles that model's going to be used for. So I'm going to be using that model in my VS Code for using the chat interface and the edit interface, and I'll show you later what those things are. The other model that I want to make use of on my local GPU is a very small model, and I'm going to just use it for this role Autocomplete here. Autocomplete is kind of an interactive helper from AI, so as I'm typing things, Autocomplete will try and invoke the model and put in suggestions for what I want to type. I want this to run really fast and not use much memory on my GPU, so I'm using a very small version of Quinn Coda, so the 500 million parameter model, and I'm only having a 1000 token context window. Some of the other things I've got in my definition is a definition of the print prompts that I want to support. So I want a prompt for doing a check on my codes. So the nice thing about a prompt is you can define something that's a lot more specific and targeted to what you want the AI to do. So writing a good prompt helps a lot for telling the AI what you want it to do. So in this case, I tell it what sort of things I want to check in the code when I want to do a check. Or else another prompt I've got is a test code, which generates unit tests. And for this one, in the actual prompt, I said I want to develop PyTest based tests and the sort of tests that it should put together. So again, depending on sort of environment that you're working in, you may want different sorts of test cases. So you may have more prompts, or you may have prompts that are specific to the type of testing that you do. So that's my definition for the power spec. And like I said, I've also got a definition for the smaller Jetson Nano. So let's have a look at that. So again, go to the model definition. And so in here, I've only got two LLMs, and I can swap between either kind of a more powerful or a smaller, faster version of an LLM. So again, Quincoder, 8,000 token model. So that's going to be the main one I use by default when I go into using my Jetson Nano. Or Ollama is 3.2 with a smaller context window. Maybe if I want sort of a smaller AI assistant that may be a little faster, but also to be able to compare with these two AI assistants, I might ask each of them the same thing and see which one gave me better code. And again, I've got my prompts defined, just the same prompts defined. Oh, actually, one thing that's different here is for my unit test function. It's really creates unit tests for JavaScript rather than Python. So it's using the Jest. I tell it to use the Jest testing framework instead of the PyTest one. So that's how you can customize some of these parameters. And again, in that config.yaml reference that I showed you earlier, it goes into a lot more detail, and there's various examples of various things you can add in here. So you can also add in rules and places that it can look at to get more context as well. So these are all things you can define in the YAML files, but I haven't got them defined here. So let's have a look at what you can do with Continue. First, normally when I'm using Continue, you can bring it up just by clicking on the icon on the left side, but I like to just include it in my Explorer window. So what I do is I grab the icon, hold down my mouse key, and in Explorer, just place it below the other things I show in Explorer. Now it's in there, so it uses a little less room, at least on my screen. I have a fairly cramped screen, so it allows me to have the Continue interface on the same window as Open Editors and Explorer. So when you're using Continue, there seems to be like 4 different main roles or modes that you can use it in. The first one I'm going to show you here is Autocomplete. So as I'm typing code, the LLM will look at what I'm doing and try and auto-complete the line for me. So I'm using this piece of code here. So this is for a little state park web service, and it's one of the routines in there is to find the distance between 2 points based on longitude and latitude. So at the moment it's returning the distance in miles. So I want to get it in meters. I can type in meters and equal, and you see here it's done an autocomplete on the line to give me fairly good code for converting miles to meters. Next, let's have a look at the chat mode or role. So again, I'm in Continue here. I'll just make this a little wider because most of the action is going to be in here in Continue. So in my project, I'm going to add a new file. I'll just call it settings.py. So just an empty file at the moment. And over here, I'm going to paste in a prompt. So I'm asking the chat interface to create a Python class that will read and write settings to a settings.json file. In particular, I want to manage settings for timeout, SSID, and password, and use the Python @property and @value decorators for saving and retrieving setting values. So let's try running that. And just like many of the chat interfaces, it does all that. The nice thing is it's because it's in VS Code, you can do some things like hit apply. So it goes and put that code into the editor that I'm working in at the moment. And you see here it's using properties, setters, and it also has an example of how to use it. Another way I can use the chat mode is from code. So if I open up this piece of code and I do a Control A to select it all, and I can do a Control L to move that code into my chat window as context. So let's do a Control L. And now I can do something in chat like explain this code. And gives me quite a nice little explanation of my code. Other thing I can do with the chat is if I have some prompts defined. So for example, I've got a prompt called check. So let me use this prompt. And goes through my code and gives me some ideas for improving it and checks if there's anything I really should be fixing up. Okay, finally, just wanted to show you how to use the edit mode or edit role. So again, I'll open up this piece of code I've got. I'm going to do a Control A to select all the code, and then I'm going to do a Control I to say I want to work in edit mode on it. And I'm going to say suggest improvements to this code. Run that, and this runs on the actual code in the editor rather than as a chat window, so it makes changes or makes possible changes to the code that I've got open. And this is kind of nice because you can either accept all the changes blindly and just hit accept over here or apply all the changes, or you can look at each thing that it thought it could improve and just accept that. So in this case, it thought it'd be better to produce the distances in kilometers rather than miles. Seems a bit opinionated, but that's the kind of thing it can do, and can add in things like additional comments and things too. So again, designing your prompt for this is probably important, but you can get it to work on the code that you've got open at the moment. So that's about it for the demo. The other thing just to be aware of is this attach context option. So if you click on that, up here, you can do things like attach other files as context. So say you're working on something and you want it to look at, say, a master library, you can add it as context for the chats or the edits that you're doing, which is useful. Can get a lot deeper with the context as well. It can be files, it can be your code base, it can be MCP agents, it can be a whole bunch of things. So you can make it really rich with the context by updating that config.yaml file and provide more context providers and things. There's some built-in ones. So it looks like this should be useful. That's about it for this video. You'll probably see more of me using it in the future videos where I'm actually writing some AI code to use with my Scamp camper. Things like looking up parks and useful information for when I'm camping. I want to add into my interface for using my AI data center. Thanks.